Thank you all so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining on Zoom. It's an absolute pleasure to come and talk about an animal and a species that is very near and dear to my heart. And I hope you leave here tonight having a little bit better understanding of our population of right whales and why they're so endangered and what we're trying to do to save them. So with that, let me share my screen. Okay. How's that looking, Rick? You good?
Looks good.
All right, fantastic. All right, well, as Leanne said, I am here to talk to you guys about the North Pacific right whale. A lot of you may have heard about the Atlantic right whale. Not many people know that there's actually a Pacific right whale that has in fact been found along the west coast of California. So that's in part why I'm here to talk to you about it. So some of this might be a little bit of review. Right whales are a large baleen whale species. They are filter feeders. They feed primarily on copepods, but they will also feed on euphausiids. And the North Pacific right whale is actually split into two distinct populations. You have the Western North Pacific right whale, which is found in Russian waters and along the waters of Japan. And then you have the Eastern population, and that's the population that's found along the coast of North America, along the West Coast. And for this talk, I'm only going to be focusing on the Eastern North Pacific right whale. The Western, we think, because I'm sure someone's going to ask, we think there are somewhere on order about 300 to 400 or so Western North Pacific right whales, although that abundance estimate is very old and wasn't super reliable, so we're not sure about the Western. But from here on out, I'm going to be focusing on the Eastern, the ones in our waters. So North Pacific right whales were once distributed widely across the entire North Pacific, and then they became the target of Yankee whaling. And it's estimated that somewhere between 26 and 37,000 animals were taken, with the majority of that happening in just a few decades. And so that brought the population for the Eastern whales down to what we think may have been the high hundreds, similar to, well, I don't know what similar to, but somewhere 700-800. Then in the 60s, the Soviets came in and they began hunting right whales illegally. They took over 700 additional animals from this population, just decimated what was left of the population, brought it down to what we think the numbers are today. So in an attempt to try and get an abundance estimate, we did a bunch of surveys in the 80s and 90s up into the early 2000s. And this is all the sightings we had of right whales in our waters. Hopefully you guys can see that there in the back. They're concentrated in the southeastern Bering Sea with a handful of sightings elsewhere. But that's it. This is all they found in, 25 odd years of surveying. And based on data collected from all these surveys, we came up with a population abundance estimate of about 30 animals. 30. So there are, between the Zoom and the people in this room, roughly about as many Eastern North Pacific right whales. Of that, there was only an estimated 8 females. And based on genetic samples, they thought it was a 2-to-1 male bias ratio. However, as if that wasn't bad enough, we reanalyzed all our genetic samples, a colleague of ours. It's actually closer to 3-to-1 males, which unfortunately is the opposite ratio you want when you're trying to rebuild a population. So because of this, in 2008, NOAA designated 2 different areas of critical habitat for our right whales. A large polygon there in the southeastern Bering Sea, and then there's a smaller one there off Kodiak Island in the Gulf of Alaska. Hopefully you guys can see that. And so we know these animals can be found in these areas in summer. It's their known feeding grounds. What we don't know is where they go when, or even if they leave these grounds. We have no idea what their migratory routes are, where their breeding or calving grounds are. Big question mark. And if you go back to the old whaling logbooks, even the logbooks from the whaling captains say they had no evidence of breeding grounds, and they covered the entire North Pacific. So it's this big unknown question of where are these guys when they aren't in Alaskan waters? That's one of the biggest questions we're trying to answer. So we think that, like most large baleen whales, they do migrate south. There were about a dozen or so sightings off the coast of California and Baja over several decades. There was also a high to low latitude match. A right whale was seen off Hawaii in April in 1996, and then was later resighted in the Bering Sea in July of that same year. And so that today is still the first and only high to low latitude match of an eastern North Pacific right whale. And in 2021, we did a survey in the Gulf of Alaska. We actually had 2 sightings of 4 different right whales, which was fantastic. Sightings in the Gulf are even more rare than sightings in the Bering. And of the 2 animals that were seen in Barnabas Trough in their critical habitat, one of them had actually been seen about 2 months prior off the coast of Haida Gwaii in British Columbia by DFO. They were able to obtain a biopsy sample of this animal. So once those are analyzed, we'll be able to know the sex, the reproductive status, stress. We'll get a lot of really, really great info about this animal. So a really fantastic sighting. And this was actually now the first time an animal from BC has been matched to anywhere. More recently, there was actually a sighting of a right whale just off Año Nuevo, California. It's beautiful footage. Hopefully that's coming through okay. Beautiful footage of a skim feeding North Pacific right whale that was seen in April of last year. This was reported by some recreational fishers. And this was a really fantastic sighting because this is one of the first instances of feeding outside of the Alaskan waters. So it was a fantastic sighting. And even more recently, just this March, we had a right whale seen off Monterey. And this animal, it was only seen, they were only in the presence of the animal for about 15, 20 minutes. There was no evidence of feeding, but another really fantastic sighting. All of these sightings that happen outside of their feeding grounds are just a few more pieces to that puzzle of where these animals are going. So when you start putting it all together, you see there's some nice sightings all along the West Coast here. But we think what's happening is we might have actually 2 different subgroups of whales, one in the Bering Sea that may migrate south to Hawaii, and then one in the Gulf of Alaska that may end up making its way towards BC and then down the West Coast. But we have an N of 1 in either scenario. Not exactly something you want to build a solid hypothesis on. So for right now, it's just a theory. But the biggest supporting piece of evidence for that is that we have never had a match between the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. Of all of our sightings, there's never been one animal seen in both locations. But then, just to add another big old piece to the puzzle, 2 right whales were seen skim feeding in February of 2022, about 40 miles northeast of Unimak Pass in the Aleutian Islands chain. And this was another really fantastic sighting because this was the first evidence of overwinter feeding in the Bering Sea. So we do get acoustic detections up to about January, but then that's when most of them stop. So this was the first time we have evidence of right whales overwinter and feeding in the Bering Sea. So maybe some portion of the population stays up there and doesn't leave the Bering Sea. One more question we have to try and figure out. So why not put some satellite tags on them, right? Big question, easy. Well, we tried. We successfully deployed 6 tags on right whales, some in 2004 and then again in 2008 and 2009. And we got some fantastic data on habitat use and localized movements and feeding behavior. And then the tags fell out before they ever left their habitat. Oh. So unfortunately, while we got some really great fine scale data, it answered no questions about migratory pathways. So why is it that we know so little about these guys? Aside from the fact that there are 30, why are there still so many unknown questions? Well, to help try and answer that, I want to talk a little bit first about their Atlantic cousins. So North Atlantic right whales, they're called the urban whale, right? They're currently a species in the spotlight. For better or worse, their entire migratory route is along the east coast of the US. At any given time of the year, you can go to the east coast at some place and see Atlantic right whales. They're constantly in the public eye. They're extremely accessible. You can see they're out there with, ribs and 20-foot boats. So they're extremely accessible. Because of that, they are very well known, very well studied. Our population is quite literally the opposite. They are extremely remote. I call them, the remote whale or the forgotten whale. We call them the species in the shadows. So we know the only place we know for sure we can find them is the Bering Sea. Even then, their habitat and the high density area, I use quotes around that, is a full day's steam from the nearest port of Dutch Harbor. So even when we get to Dutch Harbor, we can't just go out in a rib, drop a dipping phone over the side of the boat and listen to these whales, right? And the Bering Sea is gross at the best of times and downright unworkable at the worst of times. This is an actual right whale survey footage I took in 2010. Imagine trying to find anything in this, let alone a whale. So, so that's the problem is it's remote, it's hard to get to, it's a huge area, there's only 30. So I like to try and break it down a little bit to really put it into perspective. So I always like to have a slide, right whales by the numbers. I've been going to Alaska for 13 years of field work, skipped one because of COVID. That amounted to 592 days out at sea. To be fair, some of that was Chukchi and Beaufort, where right whales were not known to inhabit. So let's reduce that down to days in the Bering Sea or the Gulf of Alaska. 459 days out at sea looking for these guys. I've seen right whales on 22.
Wow.
For those who don't like math, that's about 4.7%, right? And we went 5 years without a single sighting on our surveys, right? So, but even then, you're dealing with the survivors of a population that was decimated by whaling. As soon as a vessel comes anywhere near them, their behavior completely changes. They stop vocalizing, their very regular dive patterns become erratic, they surface 3 times in different places and then they disappear. So of those 22 days, we've only been in the presence of right whales for 69 hours and 45 minutes, which is about 2.9 days. And I've probably seen more right whales and been in the presence of more right whales than almost anyone else, except for a very small handful of people.
Wow.
So that's the problem. How do you study a population that has 30 animals that you can't find? If you do find them, right? Most of the time, you see photos that are so low profile, you get maybe the top of the head. It's the Bering Sea, so odds are they're in a thick fog bank. Or my personal favorite, they're swimming away, so you get their back. Right? Not particularly helpful photos when you're trying to, get photo ID shots. Even less helpful if you're trying to actually get a biopsy sample, deploy a satellite tag. So they're just very, very difficult animals to try and study. So how do you study the proverbial needle in a very large haystack? Well, we use primarily passive acoustics because luckily right whales are fairly chatty. So hopefully I think my sound is up. Hopefully you guys can hear this, both on Zoom and in the room. So they make primarily 3 different call types. The first one is called a gunshot, and I'll play it now. So it sounds pretty much like you would expect based on the name, right? Loud, impulsive signal called a gunshot. All right, that's enough. Shush, that's enough. That's enough. Okay. They also make a lot of up calls. I'll play this one for you. I'm pretty sure most of you didn't hear that. It's basically like a whoop, right? Class, it's real quiet. If we had really good speakers, if you want, come up afterwards. I'll play it for you guys so you can hear it instead of my imitation of it. But that's, I try. So that's basically what that sounds like. It's thought to be a contact call that they use to communicate with conspecifics with other right whales. And then if that one didn't work, I doubt this one too, but I'll play it just in case the Zoom folks can hear it. Back up. Back up.
Is that a motorcycle or is that?
So that one, it was kind of like, right? Like
you're just,
yeah, just a real,
like
right?
driving across the asphalt.
Yeah. So these are the most common call types. All right whale populations and species will make these calls, but what's unique about our population is they tend to favor the gunshot call more than any other. So they gunshot with extreme frequency, like 4 to 5 times as they do the up call, which is really unique and pretty interesting. So there are two components to our passive acoustic monitoring. The first is our short-term monitoring, which we do when we're out at sea trying to find these guys. We primarily use an instrument called a sonobuoy, which is a free-floating, real-time listening device, and it transmits audio signals in real time using VHF radio waves. So we have a receiver on the boat, we deploy these overboard, and we can hear sounds as they're happening. So if we hear a right whale, we start calling, we hear those gunshot calls, we can hear it as it's happening. The other good thing is they have directional capabilities. So if we do hear a right whale, we can deploy multiple sonobuoys and actually triangulate on their call. And then I can say, hey, Captain, there's a right whale about 40 right, 10 miles away, go that way. From there, our visual team can spot them, and then we can start working the animal. And so these instruments have really been instrumental in increasing our right whale sightings, our information that we know about them, getting some really, really amazing data. We often will have probably 2/3 of our right whale sightings are usually a result of sonobuoy localizations. The other aspect of our acoustic monitoring is our long-term monitoring. So we can only get up to Alaska once a year, right? The rest of the year, it's covered in ice and it's expensive. It's really far away. So we do long-term monitoring where we will deploy bottom-mounted passive acoustic recorders that will stay out for a full year. They're subsurface, they sit at the bottom. I just had like weird echo or something. Yeah, no, I thought I heard someone go, huh.
Yeah, I did that.
Technology. So these we'll deploy these moorings. They'll sit on the bottom. They'll stay out for a full year, recording any sound in the water, and then we go back the next year and we retrieve them. And then at that point we can download and analyze the data. So everywhere you see a circle on this map is where we currently have an acoustic recorder mooring deployed. The one exception are the 3 bright yellow ones down in the Gulf. Those are going to be deployed this fall on our upcoming surveys. And so this is a really fantastic way to be able to monitor for any Alaskan marine mammal species across a pretty substantial portion of Alaskan waters. And so this is really the bread and butter of the acoustic monitoring that we do at the Marine Mammal Lab. This allows us to keep an eye on distribution patterns, whether they're shifting, if subarctics are encroaching farther north, what's happening. It's a really, really amazing data set that we've now been going since 2007. And a good number of them, I think about half, are also co-located with oceanographic instrumentation. So we're able to correlate right whale distribution with oceanographic data. So I'm going to walk you through just a couple of results. This plot here shows one mooring site. It's the BS2, which is right in their critical habitat. And you're looking at 2 years of data, September 2014 to September of 2016. Your black vertical bars are the percent of recording intervals that day that had right whale calls in 10-minute intervals. So if it goes all the way to 100, that means every 10-minute sample that we recorded that day had at least one right whale in it. Your blue lines are your percent ice concentration, and any gray sections are where we have no data. Either the recorder stopped early or it failed or we lost it. So this is, one site, 2 years worth. But now I want to take you all the way to 9 sites over, I think, 6 years. And so now you can kind of see how we get these really great long-term data sets of right whale distribution throughout the Bering Sea shelf. And a few patterns you can see right away. These here are either in or immediately north of their right whale critical habitat. So with very regular, consistent, seasonal summer fall presence of right whales in their habitat. But interestingly, in our later years, we're starting to see right whale detections being detected farther north in the northern Bering. So I'm going to put a pin in that. We'll circle back to that. So keep that in mind. Okay. But like all things with right whales, they don't make it easy. So you look at this and you think, yeah, that's a gunshot. You just showed us a beautiful example of it, right? Nope. That came from barrow from a bowhead whale. So of course, bowheads also make gunshots. And bowhead whales will come all the way south into the southeastern Bering into right whale critical habitat. So here we have, this is kind of a running spectrogram, 5 minutes, or 5 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever, of beautiful bowhead whale singing, right? A lot of animals. You see some bearded seals in there too. And right in the thick of it, if you can see those red boxes, are 3 textbook right whale upcalls. So, is it a bowhead? Is it a right whale? We don't know. And so if we go back to our long-term data set, all of these detections that are under ice over winter, we don't know if they're bowheads or right whales. All we can do for right now is mark them as ambiguous or maybe until we have a better way of distinguishing them. One of the ways that we're hoping that we can do that is from a recent discovery we had back in 2019. So we were going through our long-term data set, and I started seeing that these gunshots were happening very regularly, like clockwork, like a metronome. But then I also started noticing that we were seeing these kind of repeating stanzas that looked really similar. And then I noticed, hey, even this first part that's really complicated is exactly the same. The timing is lining up perfectly. So we started digging into these, drawing boxes around everything, trying to figure this out. And what we found is that our tiny little critically endangered population of right whales is singing. Oh. It's comprised almost entirely of gunshots. So it sounds very bizarre and not like anything you would expect when you hear of a cetacean singing. But it has the same hierarchical structure that you see with humpback and bowhead whale song. It has units that comprise phrases, multiple phrases that are sometimes repeated into themes that comprise a song, and that is repeated over and over and over for hours. And I just find this fascinating, and it really raised so many more questions than it answered. But so far, we found 4 different unique song types in the Bering Sea. And again, they're comprised almost completely of gunshots. And so was this a learned behavior? Was this something that they have always done, but we just now discovered it? And what's interesting and very different from humpbacks is that there's extreme long-term stability with these song types. They have remained the same for at least 8 years. And I've heard them recently, so for even longer than that. Just remarkable. And this bottom one here, this was actually recorded and localized to 2 confirmed male right whales when we were out in the sea. So we know for sure males are singing. We don't know yet whether females also sing, but so we think this might be a reproductive display, like you see with humpbacks, with bowheads. We don't know for sure though, but it's just fascinating. And then, as if that wasn't neat enough, during that 2021 survey, I detected something really fascinating. So this is one of the song types you just saw from the Bering Sea. This is what I detected in the Gulf of Alaska. Hopefully you guys can see that back there. So it's kind of recognizably the same song, but it's different. It's a variant. So now these low frequency pulses in the beginning are closer together in timing. There are a lot more of them. And then you get to that main phrase of gunshots that is now shorter, has fewer gunshots, but it still has all these repeating themes in it at the end. So even more questions. Is this unique to the Gulf of Alaska? Would we see this in the Bering Sea? How did they learn it if they are 2 different subgroups? So many questions that we're still trying to figure out, but I just think it's fascinating that, you know, the smallest and the most critically endangered of all the populations is the one to be found singing. Right whales aren't known to sing. This hasn't been documented in any of the other species. They're thought to use sperm competition as their mating strategy. So why are ours singing? No idea, but it's fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to kind of shift topics a little bit. One of the things we're asked all the time is, why do you think this population hasn't recovered, right? Well, that's $1 million question. We don't know. We don't know. We have a few theories. We have some ideas. So we mentioned that population abundance estimate of only 31. And within that, again, only 8 females, 3-to-1 male bias sex ratio. So already the odds aren't great, right? They're kind of stacked against them. And since 2004, only 4 known females have been sighted. And we actually collected 6 new biopsy samples from animals of unknown sex. And of those 6, 5 were males and 1 was a female. So where are the females? What's going on here, right? How many of them are still reproductive? We don't know if right whales go into reproductive senescence or menopause. So of our estimated 8 females, how many are still reproducing? And we have not seen a calf since 2005. Obviously, that's a photo of an Atlantic right whale cow-calf pair because we don't have any. Despite all that, I know it's getting real dark. I'm sorry. It's hard to make a lighthearted right whale talk, but bear with me because we did have a subadult female in 2013 that was sighted off the coast of British Columbia. And we had a juvenile male in 2017, right? And so this is the first time that a juvenile, an animal that young, has been seen since that 2005 calf. But they were both calves at one point. So I think the more important question we should be asking is, where are the cow-calf pairs, right? We must just be looking in a wrong spot, right? The whaling logbooks couldn't find them. We haven't found them, but clearly there's at least 1 or 2 still reproducing. So where is that? So that's what we're trying to find is we have to expand outside of Alaskan waters and outside of those areas we know they aren't, but it's a real big North Pacific Ocean. So, stay tuned for future results on that. But what about the threats this population faces? Well, obviously entanglement. It's a huge problem for the Atlantic. We'll save questions at the end. Huge problem for the Atlantic. But for our population, we really don't see evidence of entanglement. This is the only animal in our catalog that has obvious entanglement scars. It's a very big problem for the Western North Pacific right whale. So this is screenshots from some drone footage from last year of 3 right whales off Russia that have classic entanglement scars. I hope you guys can see those on the back and then down by the flukes on the peduncle, right? Classic example of line being wrapped around their flukes. And so we know it's a problem for Western right whales. Alaska has the largest fishing industry in the country by volume. So the overlap between right whales and fishing gear is very high. The potential is very high. The problem is we haven't been able to quantify those impacts to the population. We don't see animals with entanglement scars. But is that because they're not getting entangled? Or because they're getting entangled and it's so remote and there's so few that they're dying before it gets reported? Same thing with vessel strikes. So here's their right whale habitat in the Aleutian Islands chain. Those 2 yellow stars are where we have a couple of acoustic recorders. Here's a spatial density plot of all vessel activity in the area. And this is from a while ago. This is from, I think, 2016, if memory serves. But that kind of northeastern star there in Unimak Pass, that is right through the Great Circle Route shipping lanes from the US over to Asia. So again, extreme overlap between right whales and vessels. But again, we have not been able to quantify the direct impacts. So obviously the threats are huge, but we don't know. We don't know exactly how many animals are being struck. We've never had a report of a struck right whale. But is it because it's not happening or because it's too remote? And just kind of reiterating that, there was that February sighting of right whales 40 miles just northeast of Unimak Pass. So we know they're there. We know it's right where all the vessels are going through. One of the kind of less obvious impacts, and one that I actually asked about a lot, is climate change. How could that be impacting this population? So this plot here, it shows the temperature change across the globe in the last 50 years, according to baseline. And you can see the Arctic is obviously being impacted most heavily, right? And so if you look at, this is a plot showing the percent ice concentration in the Bering Sea. Notice particularly in the most recent years, the extreme lows. 2018, we had record low ice that year. And then again, comparing bottom temperature on the Bering Shelf from 2010 to 2019. And so in 2010, we have a really strong, what we call a cold pool. So when you have really heavy ice concentration over winter, then when that melts, that settles on the bottom and you get a really strong concentrated area of that cold remnant winter water, right? It's what we call the cold pool. So really strong cold pool in 2010, non-existent in 2019, except for, up north in the Bering Sea. So what does that mean for right whales? Well, if you look at copepods, which is their primary prey, and you look at those warm and cold pool years, I really just want you to focus on that middle plot, which are the large copepods, which is what they primarily prey on. And in the cold years, you get really high abundances of those large lipid-rich copepods. But in the warm years, it really favors the small copepods. In warm years, the copepods are smaller, they're less lipid-rich, and they don't last as long in the summer. And so then if you tie that to right whales, this is some work that my colleague at NOAA did, Alex Zerbini. And in the 2 years with the strong cold pools, with the tagged right whales, their movements were really pretty heavily restricted just to that cold pool, right where all their prey were concentrated. They didn't have to go far. But then when you compare that to a warm year, and this was 2004, so this was even when warm was relative compared to now, and their movements are much more widely distributed, right? So what we think is happening is that their copepodic prey that are large and lipid rich are staying with the cold water. So if the waters are colder farther north, they may have to be following suit. So again, if we go back to that long-term passive acoustic data set that I was mentioning earlier, those warm years are the years where we're seeing right whale detections showing up farther north in the Bering. So we think that's primarily what's happening. And we're still working out some of the nuances and really trying to better understand this relationship. But it looks like as the ocean temperatures increase, the copepods that are fatter and more lipid rich are following that cold pool or staying up in the cooler waters. So the right whales may have to shift their distribution farther north to find those prey. Okay, so shifting tactics again, one more time. I would be completely remiss if I didn't talk about how you actually identify them. This might be complete review for all of you. If it is, bear with me. But they're obviously lot wide, big flat backs, dark in color, no dorsal fin. They have callosities on, there it is, callosities on the top of their head, those big white bumps. That is a key distinguishing feature of right whales. They've got this really nice V-shaped blow to them. And then their flukes are really wide, they're triangular. They've got this really beautiful deep notch in the middle. And then their pectoral fins have this really unique, like paddle-like shape to it. So if you see all of these or even any one of these, hopefully you're thinking, hey, I got something unique. This could be a right whale. And so those callosities, those white bumps on their head, that's actually what we use to identify individual right whales. The pattern of those callosities are unique to each animal. So it's like their fingerprint, like the flukes of a humpback whale. So when you compare these 4 photos, hopefully you can see in the back there, but you can see that those callosities are different on each one. Some have them on their lips, some don't. Some have the bonnet completely sealed, some don't. So that's why it's so important for us to get photos of the side of the head above the water so that we get a clear shot of those callosities so we can compare it to our catalog. Fun fact, if you don't know, the reason callosities are white is because they're covered in cyanids, in whale lice, right? And it's unique to right whales. They have unique species for each species of whale. Fun little tidbit. And so I like to have right whales kind of compared side by side to those species that they're most commonly mistaken for. So you can see that the callosities on the right whales, they really are big and white and bumpy and very different from those of humpback, from the nodules on the humpback and from that gray coloration on the gray whales. And then that blow, I mentioned that really nice deep V blow. I really like showing that compared to especially gray whales, you know, the heart-shaped gray whale blow. The gray whale blow, it's connected halfway down, right? But right whales, if you get a really nice shot, it's a beautiful V. It's separated all the way down to the blowholes. And so I always say, if you see a whale and you find yourself saying, well, that's a funny looking gray whale, a funny looking humpback whale, fill in the blank, odds are it's not, right? So it warrants taking a closer look. And you're like, okay, great, we know, yeah. Why is this so important, right? So there's a right whale seen right here off La Jolla in April of 2017, right off La Jolla's shores. So close to shore, you could see it right from shore. Frolicking in the kelp, beautiful shot of that paddle-shaped pectoral fin, right? Well, this is a screenshot from the news story that came out that night of the whale. It was identified as a gray whale. And it wasn't until drone footage of the animal was circulated on social media about a week later that everyone went, oh, wait a minute, and tagged us in it. By then, the animal was gone, and we missed any opportunity to go and get photo ID photographs. So we have enough footage to say, yes, it was a right whale and add the sighting to our list, but not good enough for any kind of photo ID. So we don't know who this animal was, whether it was new or if it was a recite. So, that begs the question, how many other right whales have been off the coast but have just been misidentified, right? And so that's why we always are so harping on identifying those differences between whales that it's commonly identified for, because, the more people that are out on the water could be eyes for us. And every extraliminal sighting that happens outside of Alaskan waters is, again, it's one more piece to that puzzle. Sorry for the music in the background. It's one more piece to that puzzle of where are these animals going? What are their migratory routes? Could it be they are coming down the west coast of the US? And so the best thing that you guys can do is just tell everyone who's willing to listen to you about these animals, what to look for. We're trying at our center to increase our outreach efforts along the whole west coast to whale watch companies, scuba dive operations, commercial and recreational fishers. Anyone who goes out on the water could be eyes out for us. And again, I just want to point out, they are rare, but that's a decent number of sightings right here off the coast of California. So, and finally, what to do if you actually see a right whale, right? A lot of this, again, hopefully is common knowledge, but reduce your speed. They are critically endangered, so you have to stay 500 meters away. If you can get photos or video of it, please do so if you can do so safely, and report it. These are so important. If you can, note the date and the time, the location, number of animals. If you can get any info about their behavior, great. And then I like to put a photo of an ideal shot. An ideal photo ID shot of the side of the head where we get those callosities. And then I said, please report it. You can email np.rw@noaa.gov. Hopefully super easy to remember. You can email me. That's my cell phone. You can text me. And here's where I'm going to put a plug for those who are live in person. We do have some right whale swag, stickers, magnets, bookmarks that also have that email address on it, np.rw@noaa.gov. So please feel free to take them. And with that, there are obviously a lot of people to acknowledge. It takes a village. Mine is large and exceptional. I don't have time to thank everyone involved, but they are listed here. And I'm actually going to, during the questions, leave it up here on this page. So you guys, hopefully it really sinks in. And with that, hopefully my timing was okay, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So I'll just put a plug in again. If you have questions, if you're a Zoom participant, put them in the chat box and we'll read them for Jess and she can answer them. Right now, we are still waiting for those. So let me ask behind me.
Feeding behavior up to the areas.
Mm-hmm.
Are they benthic? Are they skimming?
They are primarily skim feeders. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they will dive down into the water column. They're not benthic though, because they do like the copepods, which tend to school in the water column. So you'll either see them skimming at the surface, like you saw with the videos off California from that recreational fisher and the one in Unimac, but they will also go down into the midwater column. Yeah. Yeah.
For calves and calves on the Pacific and calves on the Atlantic, can you compare the two each other, or is it completely different when they're with their mother on the Pacific side versus the Atlantic?
Do you mean from a habitat standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like when they're together, do they?
Sure.
Because I know you said you don't have a lot of them, and weren't sure how to identify.
Right, yeah.
it.
It occurred to me, I'll repeat the question so that in case the Zoom people didn't hear it. So the question was, since we don't have calves, can we compare it to what we do know from the Atlantic calves? And the short answer is sort of. So there was a study that looked at right whale calving grounds and oceanographic conditions, bathymetric conditions for the Atlantic, and then modeled that over towards the Pacific to see where ideal calving grounds would be based on our oceanographic and bathymetric features. And what they found was basically Southern California, Baja. So, I think that is very reasonable given the sightings. But again, for our population, we've had, the two calves that were seen in 2004 or 2005. So it's difficult to make those direct comparisons since their two habitats are so different. But it has been done. Yeah.
Let's do an online one and then we'll come back onto the boat. George wants to know, do their calls seem to attract others? Can you distinguish by the sounds if when you have more than one individual?
Great question. I certainly hope their calls attract others for their sake. Yeah, so we do presume that yes, their calls would attract other right whales. We can sometimes tell if there are multiple callers. If you get a whole bunch of gunshots and some are really loud and some are very soft and have evidence of propagation distortion, then you obviously know you have whales coming from different distances to the recorder. If there are also up calls in the mix, if the up calls are overlapping, then we know we have multiple callers. So we do have quite a few instances of multiple right whales calling at once from our right whale habitat locations. Yeah.
As if they're answering each other?
Potentially.
How far would the distance be that you'd be able to detect chatting back and forth?
Right. So the question was how far away can we detect the gunshots and detect them counter calling basically? Our recorders, so it depends on so many different factors, right? Oceanographic conditions, bottom composition, the whale itself and how loud they're calling. We suspect we can detect gunshots on our recorders consistently out to about 30 miles. With sonobuoys, I have localized on a right whale 40 miles away. That's the farthest I've been able to localize. Yeah.
And do you think probably the gunshot vocalization is so loud because there's so few and the distance could be pretty far that they're like shouting, so can you hear me? type of.
I mean, it's certainly possible, but if you look at the Atlantic, they gunshot quite frequently when they're in big sags with, 10 plus whales. So we don't really know the exact function of a gunshot. It could be trying to communicate over long distances. It could be, it's thought in some cases to be a sign of aggression towards a whale or like an agonistic display, like get away from me. There are any number of possible behaviors associated with that. But what is consistent is that among all populations, the gunshots are just very loud broadband signals.
And did I miss the estimated numbers of the Atlantic population?
Yeah. Well, you didn't miss it because I didn't say it, but
okay.
They are in the low 300s. I
So
think at current count, it was around 340.
Yeah.
And they are declining pretty rapidly.
Do you think the countries that we know of, that we've heard of, that do the illegal hunting, is that still occurring presently, the hunting from?
The short answer is we don't think so. We have no way of knowing for certainty, right? We can't monitor the entire area
because of social media now. Do you think they'd be so tight-lipped, like the whaling countries that we have heard of growing up? That
right.
We
have no reason to believe that illegal whaling is certainly on these populations is still happening. But again, we have no way for sure.
They'd have to hide it pretty good, you think?
Especially since they're monitoring that kind of stuff from satellite these days.
Yeah.
Oh, they are.
Mm-hmm.
So
So-
they're trying to find the illegal unreported
Mhm.
Okay.
whalers.
So
But, I mean, it's
might
same-
have a handle on that, you think?
Yeah,
then?
but
Maybe-
also, those that are going out and whaling, they're not going to waste their time trying to find a right whale. They're going for populations in areas where they know they've got a lot of whales. So, I don't think there's
I
any
mean, they
illegal
would
whaling
take
still
whatever they
happening.
see though, if they're, hunting illegally, correct? It would, they're not
I,
choosy, is what am I trying to say? Is there,
If they stumbled across one, would they take it? I don't
Yeah.
know. I can't answer that. We have no evidence that they are illegally whaling. But yeah, we would have no way of knowing for sure.
That's good.
So,
Kind of a follow-up is on Zoom is, are there researchers in and around Russia? Do you have colleagues that study them in Russia, Russian waters, with whom you are collaborating?
there aren't really any Russian scientists that are specifically studying the Western right whale. There have been sightings, and they do have a catalog of known animals, but there isn't any one curator. There isn't any one person who is actively studying that population.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question on behalf of me. I'm particularly interested in your sonobuoy NM number 1, which is the one that sits in the pinch point
Mhm.
between the Chukchi and the Bering Sea.
Mhm.
And how long has that been in the water? And have you heard much activity? Because if they're going to go through there, they're going to go. You're going to be able to pick that up, I think.
Yep. So the gnome mooring has been in since 2012. 2012. We are. Has Dana gotten? I think we have gotten a few gunshots on that one. We are hesitant to say for certain that those are right whale gunshots because, again, bowheads very much come down there, and it was close enough to overlap in the timing between them that we don't want to say for certain, yes, those are gunshots.
What are the indigenous people, though? I mean, you got indigenous people
Mhm.
there
Yep.
that are on the water hunting.
There have been reports from the indigenous
Are they?
peoples.
What are they telling us? I'm seeing bowheads. I'm seeing right whales.
Yeah, so we don't get many reports, but they have seen right whales up near St. Lawrence. There have been 2 sightings or 3 sightings since 2018 from the residents of Sabunga or Gamble. They call them barnacled bowheads, so they're out on the water all the time, and so they obviously see a right whale that's very different from bowheads and humpbacks and anything else. And so yeah, they will report those to a colleague of ours who's based out of Nome. And then she'll pass on reports to us. Unfortunately, we don't have any sightings, or any photographs from them because they're busy hunting and not taking photos.
They're a little busy.
But yes, we do get reports from the indigenous peoples in Alaska.
Question. Why are they called the right whale?
Great question. And for those who couldn't hear, the question is, why are they called the right whale? They are called the right whale because they were the right whale to kill, because they were slow moving, they had a lot of blubber, and they float when they were killed.
Yeah,
Yep, exactly.
I remember that as a kid hearing that.
Yep.
Do you want to movement to pick a new nickname?
Right.
Priority right now.
Right whale to see.
Yeah, right?
The right whale to save, right?
Yes, the right whale to save, exactly.
I'm curious, so you said that they don't really study the ones in Russia, so if they're not studying those, how do you know that they're not going over to Russia at all?
Ooh, great question. So the question was, if no one's really studying the Western population, how do we know that they're not coming over into the Eastern side? There have been no sightings kind of in between the 2 areas they're known to occur. But even more compelling is the genetic data. So the study that found the new male bisex ratio of 3:1, they also studied a similar number of samples from the Western population, and they are genetically distinct. So even if there might be a little bit of overlap on those feeding grounds, they're not interbreeding.
Like with drone footage and the advancements in that, has it become any easier to study them, or is it like it's so foggy and rough in the Bering Sea that it's not made any difference?
Yeah, so the question is, can we use drones in the Bering Sea with the advancements in technology, or can we not because of weather conditions? We have right whales were not included on our original drone permit. And so although they are on our permit now and we can use drones in the future, NOAA requires 2 drone pilots. And so for all of the surveys that I have been on, we have not had 2 drone pilots. And so we haven't had the ability to launch drones. Most of the other surveys that we do in the Bering are, they're not dedicated marine mammal surveys. We haven't had a dedicated right whale survey since 2010. Most of our other surveys and fieldwork that we do are to go deploy and retrieve those long-term moorings. And so we don't have the time even to divert to go find a right whale, let alone bring drone pilots and launch that. But all of that said, I really hope that we can start incorporating them a lot more in the future. I think that would be a fantastic way to get some of those photo ID data, some of the aerial images where we can get behavioral data, potentially sex, depending on how cooperative they are. You know, and get some of those really, really crucial data without having to get near them with the vessel. But yeah, the Bering Sea would come with a lot of additional challenges, wind, fog, you name it.
How can you sex them from drone footage?
If they happen to roll over and show you their belly, yep, you can see the
I was
slits.
like from the top.
No, it's the only way. Same thing with any other cetacean. Yeah, they would have to roll over, and ours are very uncooperative.
You're reading things.
Identifying gray whales.
Yep.
So one of our Zoom questions is, what made you interested in the right whale?
Ooh, great question. You know, it's funny. I started working at the Marine Mammal Lab in 2009. 2 months after I started, I went out to sea for 3 months, and we found, I think, 7 unique right whales that year. And everyone was losing their minds. And I was like, I mean, yeah, that's cool, but what's the big deal? And then I got back and, you know, studied a little bit more about right whales and went, oh, I get it. I understand now. And since then, you know, they're the underdogs. You know, everyone loves a good underdog story. And they're in this predicament as a direct result of human activities. And so we owe it to them to do what we can to try and save them. And then the more I study them, I have a very love-hate relationship with this population. I love them and they make it so difficult to study them. But they're endearing and they are resilient. They are survivors. Our population, they're nice and fat and robust and healthy, the animals that we see. So, you know, we got to do what we can to give them their best shot.
Another question from Zoom is, any idea why there's such a large gender disparity in that 5 to 1 or 3 to 1?
Yeah.
Differential mortality possibly, or?
Possibly. You know, it's impossible to know since that ratio has been around since we've started studying them. It could be that maybe the cow calves were easier to take. You know, I mean, that's my guess, but unfortunately we don't know. We don't know. I mean, I guess it's possible that we are somehow not randomly sampling the population. And so if, again, those cow calves are elsewhere and we're just not seeing them, maybe most of the males are concentrated in the Bering. And so we're kind of sampling biasly.
That's what hurt.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we don't know, unfortunately.
Any idea on the longevity? Like, you know, the bowheads have recently been reported to be this astronomically large number, you know, maybe in the neighborhood of 200 years.
Yep.
Do you think that the right whales might be capable of that?
I think it's certainly possible. They are similar to bowheads. You know, they're both part of the Balanid, what would that be, class? But, you know, again, the short answer is we don't know. We haven't been doing photo ID studies long enough on any population to be able to say for certain. But because they are so, I mean, they're large, they're slow growing, they invest a lot in caring for their young. So given what we know about large whales and certainly the fact that they're similar to bowheads, I think it's not out of the realm of possibility to say they could live to be well over 100.
And I found it interesting where you found the concentration in the Bering Sea just up off of Dutch Harbor and through the pass. I've spent a few days there myself.
Oh, so you know.
And that's also the area of the killer whale ambush for gray whales.
Mm-hmm.
Any ideas why the killer whales are leaving these guys alone, or are they? Because you're not showing a lot of rake marks on them.
We do see rake marks.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We do see rake marks, not super frequently. My guess is that why go for a 60-foot fat whale that's super healthy when you could pick off the smaller calves? That's my guess. But yeah, we do see rake marks.
Okay.
And you will also see evidence of predation on bowhead whales by killer whales up in the Beaufort. So, yeah, killer whales will take down bowheads. So, you know, if they're feeling particularly feisty, it could certainly happen. Yep.
Do you know where the females are? Are they more on the Gulf or the Bering Sea?
We don't know. All the females that we have sampled, we had the one female that was off BC. The rest have all been in the Bering. Of the few that have been sampled.
The two that I remember that I saw sightings in California, so Monterey was March, and Hoya was April. The times that they've been seen in our area in California waters, has it been primarily like that spring season, or is it first time up here?
Great question. The sightings along California have primarily been in that spring, February, March, April, May. There was also also in May of 2017, a month after that La Jolla sighting, another right whale was seen off the Channel Islands, and he was incredibly cooperative. He was just rolling around in the kelp. They got video, they got photos, beautiful photo ID shots. We were able to confirm that as a new animal and add it to our catalog, and that was in May 5th, I believe, right off Channel Islands, Anacapa. Yeah.
So clearly outreach opportunities in California are fabulous. Thank you for coming down. But are you working with other California state agencies or universities to try to get the word out? I'm just thinking about things like the Cal Coffee cruises,
right?
You know, California Sea Grant has people running up and down the coast all the time. There's a lot of researchers spending a lot of time off the coast of California.
Absolutely.
So hopefully they'll keep an eye out too.
I hope so. Yeah, and yes, we're trying to reach out to anyone and everyone we can. The efforts thus far have been kind of concentrated to San Diego. I've reached out to a few of the whale watching operations. We haven't had a lot of time to devote to this. So, but we're in the process of trying to ramp up a big national campaign about North Pacific right whales, where we will be reaching out. My goal is to actually have metal signs kind of posted at various points all along the West Coast, similar to what they have for the Atlantic. That's like, have you seen a North Pacific right whale, right? Have them stationed at various marinas and ports all along the West Coast, so that hopefully it can just be even as simple as someone walking by and saying, what's that? Never heard of that. Let me take a look, right? And again, just trying to spread the word as much as possible. But yeah, we're absolutely going to be reaching out as far and wide as we can. But yeah, efforts so far have been limited to our free time as we've been able.
Your team of
I think you'd find reaching out to certainly the whale watch operators, because they're paying attention to anything that spouts out there. And it's my feeling, having worked with a number of them, they've got unbelievable eyes.
Yep.
They're way better. I'm not going to say they're better than the fishing captains, because the fishing captains are looking for different things. But all these guys and gals that drive these boats and watch for these things would be able to pick up, that's a whale that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of cameras and a few drones and some other technologies around. So I think, again, whatever ACS might do, maybe you don't have the legs, the time to do something, but maybe there's something we as an organization could do to somehow partner with you. Well, we're wanting to reach out with the whale watch captains anyway, and just sort of chat about these sort of collaborative efforts. And so,
absolutely. I love it. That's why we've kind of started our initial outreach efforts on whale watching operators, because they're the best people to be able to identify these whales. I've given talks to the Orange County, the LA chapters, Puget Sound chapters, pretty much anyone who's willing to let me come and ramble. I could go on for hours, you guys. It was so hard to limit my talk to just like 40 minutes. I wish I had hours to talk to you. But yeah, I mean, reaching out with the American Cetacean Society, anyone who then is willing to take any information we give them and disseminate it, we're all for. I have also a 2-page informational flyer that we will often print out and distribute. So I'm happy to send that as PDFs to whoever wants.
As a member of the national board also, aren't we, Jane? Aren't Are we contemplating a right whale issue? I think we're talking,
We are.
oh, I think, yeah, we're gonna get you in there.
Oh, well watcher had the whole issue.
Yeah.
She
Do we
said
did
an
white
article
whales?
in-
Cause I think we're getting ready to do that again.
Well.
Another one?
But she had
Nice.
a great article in the
Yeah.
last one. It
Whale
Yeah.
watcher.
circulated around here.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
just to mention, I guess that's something to mention to all people.
And
The Whale Watcher is a national publication that comes with your membership. And it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they did it was primarily an Atlantic right whale special issue that came out, I want to say it came out in like December 21 or January 22, somewhere in that time frame. And they also allowed us to do an article on Pacific right whales, and then there was one on southern right whales as well. And I do have the PDF of the Pacific right whale article that I wrote. If anyone is interested, shoot me an email and I'm happy to send that out to you as a PDF.
Jessica, you could send that article out as a PDF
Yeah.
and your information sheet, the double sheet.
Yeah.
Then this is something we can actually make accessible on our ACS website for anyone that wants it, or we can distribute it to, all of the whale watch companies and the whatnot.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, I will absolutely sell those. Yep. Yeah, thank you. Like I said, anyone who's willing to spread the word it's a big help for us. The whale that was seen in Monterey, it was seen by a whale watch operation, Monterey Bay Whale Watch, and the captain immediately was like, that looks suspicious. And they reached out to, I think they called Alyssa Schulman-Yaniger. And then she immediately was on the phone with me like, oh my God, they've got a right whale. I'm sending you photos right now. And within 20 minutes of the initial sighting, I had photos and was able to confirm. And then we launched a big effort to try and get more boats out on the water, try and get more photos. It was a really fantastic example of collaborations between whale watch operators and naturalists and scientists. And yeah, it was incredible. It was as close to a real-time sighting as we've gotten in a long time. Yeah.
Well, social media, I mean, that's take advantage of it. We criticize
Yep.
it all the time, but that's
It's absolutely the benefit of it.
Action right there.
Yeah.
Positive.
Yeah.
You were getting almost real-time photos.
Yeah. Well, and then within about another 10 minutes, I had anywhere on the order of a dozen different phone calls or texts from assorted friends who were, follow them on social media saying, hey, did you see this? I'm sure you have. So yeah, it's amazing.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
I, again, really appreciate you coming out here to San Diego for this.
Oh,
Was
my
able to
absolute pleasure.
Come out and again thank the horn blower. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. Well, I know why I said that, but the legacy. I have to really thank the legacy for coming out, or for for letting us come out and out on the boat. I told you I melted earlier. Okay, so I guess we're gonna do a raffle now, which doesn't really affect the people at home. So I want to thank everybody on Zoom. People are
Thank you,
handing me
everyone.
stuff left and right.
Any other questions, email me.
Yes,
Anytime.
email Jessica at jessica.crance@noaa.gov. And she'll send whatever
Anything you
articles
want.
or